I'm Natalie. My sister walked into my loft while I was visiting our mother, and in 30 minutes, she destroyed 15 years of my life's work. Smashed pallets, shattered mirrors, crushed vintage compacts that once belonged to our grandmother. When I saw the wreckage, my hands shook so badly I couldn't dial 911. My mother told me I was overreacting. That it was just cosmetics. That family forgives. But when the insurance check arrived for double the amount, and the detective showed me the security footage, everything changed. Want to know what my sister didn't realize she destroyed? Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started ordinary enough. I was sitting in my small studio space in Portland's Arts District, photographing a vintage Guerlain compact from the 1940s for my restoration series. The light was hitting the gold filigree just right, casting shadows across my desk like delicate lace. My phone buzzed. Mom's name lit up the screen. She wanted me to come over for lunch. Nothing unusual. We did this maybe once a month, and I'd learned to keep expectations low. She never asked about my work, never watched my videos even though my channel had grown to 500,000 subscribers. To her, what I did wasn't a real career. It was a hobby that hadn't yet matured into something respectable. I locked up my loft in the Pearl District carefully. 3 deadbolts, security system armed, cameras positioned at both entry points. It wasn't paranoia. My collection was worth more than most people's cars. Over $40,000 in carefully curated, authenticated vintage cosmetics, limited edition palettes, and pieces I'd restored myself from estate sales and auctions across the country. Some items had belonged to grandmother Helen, a makeup artist in Hollywood during the golden age of cinema. She'd worked on sets with actresses whose names still carried weight decades after their deaths. When she passed 5 years ago, she left me her entire professional collection. Lipsticks in bullet casings, rouges in Art Deco compacts, brushes with ivory handles that couldn't be made anymore. My mother had wanted to throw them out. Called them old junk taking up space. I'd driven 18 hours straight to get them before she could. The drive to Lake Oswego took 30 minutes through typical Portland drizzle. My mother's house sat behind iron gates in a neighborhood where lawns looked like they'd been trimmed with nail scissors. Everything about that house felt cold to me. Marble floors, white furniture, abstract art that cost more than it meant. I parked my old Honda between my mother's Mercedes and what I assumed was Vanessa's new Range Rover. My sister had expensive taste funded by our parents' willingness to subsidize her lifestyle. At 34, she'd never held a job longer than 6 months. She lived in a condo downtown that Mom and Dad paid for, drove cars they leased, wore clothes they bought. And somehow, I was the one who always felt like I wasn't doing enough. I walked in without knocking. The house smelled like vanilla candles and something sharp underneath, maybe cleaning solution. My mother stood in the kitchen arranging cheese on a board like she was preparing for a magazine shoot. She glanced up when I entered, her eyes doing that quick scan she always did. Checking if I'd gained weight, if my clothes were appropriate, if my hair looked intentional or accidental. "Natalie," she said, her tone flat and measured. "You made it. Vanessa's in the sitting room. She'll join us in a moment." I should have known then. Vanessa was never just visiting. She always had an agenda, and Mom always played along. I poured myself water from the filtered pitcher and leaned against the counter, waiting. My phone buzzed again. A message from Zoe, my friend and fellow content creator. She was asking if I wanted to collaborate on a video next week. I typed back a quick yes and slipped my phone into my jacket pocket. Vanessa entered the room the way she always did, like she expected applause. She wore all black, designer labels I recognized from Fashion Week coverage, her hair blown out in perfect waves. She looked at me with that particular expression she'd perfected over the years, a mixture of pity and amusement, like I was a child playing dress up. "Natalie," she said, dragging out my name. "Still doing the makeup thing?" "Still paying my own rent," I replied, keeping my voice light. It was an old dance between us. She'd poke. I'd deflect. Mom would pretend not to notice. Lunch was painful in the quiet way family meals often are. Patricia asked Vanessa about her upcoming engagement party. Brandon, her fiancé, worked in tech and apparently made enough money to satisfy our mother's standards. Vanessa talked about venue options, floral arrangements, her vision for a celebration that sounded more like a corporate gala than a wedding. I ate my salad and said little. Nobody asked about my work. Nobody mentioned the feature I'd just done in a major beauty publication. It was easier to stay invisible. Then Vanessa said something that made my stomach drop. Mom, I'm thinking of doing a beauty theme for the bridal shower. Natalie, you could help. You know, set up some cheap drugstore stuff for people to play with. I set down my fork carefully. My work isn't cheap drugstore stuff. I restore vintage cosmetics and teach people about the history of beauty products. It's archival work. Vanessa laughed, a sound like breaking glass. It's makeup, Nat. Let's not pretend you're a museum curator. My mother said nothing. Just sipped her wine and looked out the window at her perfect lawn. My father, Richard, shifted in his seat and checked his watch. Tyler, my younger brother, stared at his plate. Nobody ever stood up to Vanessa. It was easier to let her win. I excused myself, claiming I had an appointment back in the city. I didn't. I just couldn't sit there anymore, swallowing my worth while they diminished it bite by bite. I grabbed my jacket, said a polite goodbye that nobody really acknowledged, and walked out into the drizzle. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my car. Not from anger. From something deeper. The exhaustion of being unseen by people who were supposed to know you best. The drive back felt longer than it should have. I turned on music, something instrumental and calm, and tried to let the tension drain from my shoulders. I thought about grandmother Helen. How she used to let me sit in her bathroom while she got ready for events, explaining the purpose of each brush, the undertones in each lipstick. She never made me feel small. She made me feel like what I loved mattered. I wished she were still here. She would have known what to say. I parked in my building's underground garage and took the elevator up to the 4th floor. My loft was at the end of the hall, a converted industrial space with high ceilings and big windows that let in the kind of light photographers dream about. I loved this place. It was mine. Every piece of furniture, every print on the wall, every carefully organized drawer in my restoration station. I'd worked for years to afford it, doing freelance makeup for weddings and events, building my channel slowly, reinvesting every dollar into my collection and my craft. I unlocked the first deadbolt. Then the second. When I reached for the third, I noticed the door was already slightly open. My heart lurched. I pushed it wider, stepping inside slowly, and the breath left my body. The destruction was total. My restoration table was flipped on its side, drawers yanked out and emptied across the floor. Glass glittered everywhere. Shattered compacts, smashed palettes, broken mirrors reflecting the overhead light in jagged pieces. My brushes, some of them over 70 years old, lay scattered like broken bones. Lipsticks were crushed into the hardwood, streaks of red and pink and coral ground into the finish. My vintage vanity, the one grandmother Helen had used on film sets, was toppled over, its mirror cracked straight down the center. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at 15 years of my life reduced to wreckage. My phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. Somewhere in my mind, I knew I should call the police. I knew I should take pictures. But all I could do was stand there, watching the light catch on 1,000 broken things. Then I saw it. Sitting on the kitchen counter, untouched and deliberate. Vanessa's lipstick. The one she always wore, a specific shade of deep berry that she special ordered from Paris. She'd left it there like a signature. Like she wanted me to know. I don't know how long I stood there before my legs started working again. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and dialed. Not 911. Not yet. I called Zoe. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and easy. Natalie, hey, I was just editing. What's up? I couldn't form words at first. My throat had closed around them. When I finally spoke, my voice came out thin and strange. Zoe. Someone broke into my place. Everything's destroyed. Silence on her end, then movement. I'm coming. Don't touch anything. I'm 15 minutes away. She made it in 12. When she walked through my door and saw the destruction, her face went white. She pulled out her phone immediately and started photographing everything, moving carefully around the glass. We need to call the police, she said, her voice steady even though her hands weren't. And you need to document every single piece that's damaged. I nodded, still numb. Zoe handed me my phone. Make the call. I'll keep taking pictures. The police arrived 40 minutes later. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 2 officers, one older with gray temples, one younger who looked barely out of the academy. They walked through slowly, taking notes, asking questions. Had I noticed anyone suspicious in the building? Were there any signs of forced entry? Did I have security footage? I told them about the cameras. The building had them in the hallways and garage. My loft had 2, one covering the door, one covering the main living space. The older officer nodded and said they'd need to review that footage. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you know anyone who might want to do this? I hesitated. Zoe looked at me. The officer waited. And I thought about Vanessa's lipstick sitting on my counter like evidence she didn't care about hiding. I thought about lunch, about her dismissive comments, about a lifetime of being treated like my passion was worthless. I thought about our mother's silence and my father's indifference and the way nobody ever told Vanessa no. My sister, I said quietly. I think my sister did this. The younger officer raised an eyebrow. Your sister? Why would she destroy your property? I looked at the ruins of my collection, at the broken pieces of my grandmother's legacy scattered across the floor like trash. Because she's always hated that I loved something she couldn't control. The officers exchanged a glance. We'll need to pull that security footage, the older one said. And you should contact your insurance company right away. Document everything. Every item, every receipt if you have them. After they left, Zoe and I spent 3 hours cataloging the damage. I had files on my laptop, detailed records of every piece in my collection. Purchase dates, prices, authentication documents, restoration notes. Grandmother Helen had taught me to keep meticulous records. She used to say that history disappears when nobody writes it down. I'd never imagined I'd need those records for something like this. By the time we finished, the list was staggering. A Stratton powder compact from 1952, worth $800. A complete set of Bassam Cosmetics Victory Red lipsticks, limited edition, worth $1,200. A Kiga musical compact that played a lullaby when opened, worth $1,500. On and on, item after item, the numbers climbing. When I added everything up, the total came to $42,300. Zoe stared at the screen. Natalie, this is a felony. This isn't just vandalism. This is major property destruction. I know, I said. My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from someone else. I need to call my insurance company. I did, right then, sitting on my floor surrounded by broken glass and shattered dreams. The claims adjuster, a man named Gerald Finch, listened carefully as I explained what happened. He asked if I had photos, documentation, police report numbers. I had everything. He told me an investigator would be in touch within 48 hours, and that I should avoid cleaning anything up until they'd seen it. After Zoe left, promising to check on me the next day, I sat alone in the wreckage. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. I just felt hollow, scraped out, like someone had reached inside and removed something essential. I pulled my knees to my chest and stared at the broken vanity mirror. 7 years bad luck, the superstition said. But I'd already had those. This was something else. This was proof that the people who were supposed to love you could hurt you worse than strangers ever could. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Vanessa mentioned you left lunch upset. Everything okay? I stared at those words for a long time. She didn't ask if I was safe. Didn't ask if something was wrong. Just wondered if I was upset. Like my feelings were the problem, not the reason behind them. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone, pulled a blanket from my untouched bedroom, and lay down on the couch. Sleep didn't come. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain outside, wondering how you rebuild when the destruction came from inside your own blood. The investigator arrived 2 days later, earlier than expected. Her name was Lisa Chen, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made you want to tell the truth before she even asked a question. She wore practical shoes and carried a tablet instead of a briefcase, her dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested efficiency over style. She stepped carefully through my loft, photographing everything from multiple angles, zooming in on details I hadn't even noticed. A smudge on the wall. A footprint in crushed powder. The way certain items had been targeted while others remained untouched. She spent 20 minutes just observing before she spoke to me. Then she sat down at my kitchen counter, the only surface not covered in debris, and pulled up a form on her tablet. "Walk me through your day," she said. "From the moment you left until the moment you returned." I told her everything. The lunch invitation. The drive to Lake Oswego. The uncomfortable meal. Vanessa's comments. The lipstick left behind like a calling card. Lisa typed notes without looking at the screen, her eyes staying on my face the whole time. When I finished, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "How long has your sister resented your work?" I blinked at her. "What makes you think she resents it?" Lisa gestured at the destruction around us. "This wasn't random. Whoever did this knew exactly what mattered to you. They didn't steal your laptop or your camera equipment. They didn't take jewelry or electronics. They destroyed items with sentimental and historical value. That's personal. That's targeted rage." "Years," I said quietly. "Since I started taking it seriously. Since people started paying attention to what I was building." Lisa nodded like she'd heard this story before. "I'm going to request the building's security footage. I'll also need access to your personal cameras if you're willing to share that." I gave her everything. The login credentials, the date and time stamps, permission to pull whatever she needed. She thanked me and stood, her eyes sweeping the room one more time. "I've been doing this work for 12 years, she said. "I can tell you right now, your documentation is exceptional. Most people can't prove half of what they've lost. You have receipts, photos, authentication papers. That's going to matter." After she left, I finally started cleaning. Not the valuable pieces, those stayed untouched for evidence, but the general debris. Broken plastic, shattered glass from containers that weren't worth cataloging. I swept carefully, my hands steady now that shock had given way to something colder. Determination maybe. Or just the clarity that comes when you realize you're truly on your own. Zoe came by that evening with takeout and refused to leave until I ate. We sat on my couch, containers balanced on our laps, and she asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Are you going to tell your parents what you think Vanessa did?" "I don't know," I said. "What's the point? Mom will defend her. Dad will stay quiet. And Vanessa will find a way to make herself the victim." Zoe chewed thoughtfully. "What if the security footage proves it was her? Then I press charges." The words came out harder than I expected, sharp-edged and final. Zoe looked at me with something like pride. "Good," she said. "Some people need to learn that actions have consequences." 3 days later, Lisa called. "I need you to come to our office downtown. We've reviewed the footage and there's something you need to see." My stomach dropped. I drove to the insurance company's building in the financial district, parked in their garage, and took the elevator to the 9th floor. Lisa met me in the lobby and walked me back to a conference room with a large monitor mounted on the wall. She dimmed the lights and pressed play. The footage was black and white but clear. Time stamped 3:17 in the afternoon, the day I'd been at my mother's house. The hallway outside my loft. For several seconds, nothing. Then Vanessa appeared, walking quickly, her head down. She was carrying a large purse and wearing sunglasses inside. She stopped at my door and pulled something from her bag. A key. My key. The spare I'd given my mother years ago for emergencies. Vanessa unlocked my door and slipped inside. The hallway went empty again. Lisa fast-forwarded. At 3:42, Vanessa emerged. Her sunglasses were off now, hanging from her shirt collar. Her face was flushed. She looked directly at the camera for just a second, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger. Not even hatred. Satisfaction. Lisa paused the video. We also have footage from inside your unit. Your personal cameras captured everything. She switched to a different file. This footage was in color. My loft, viewed from the camera mounted near the ceiling. Vanessa entered the frame and stood still for a moment, looking around like she was planning her approach. Then she walked directly to my restoration table and started destroying everything within reach. She was methodical. She picked up each compact, each pallet, each carefully preserved piece, and smashed it. Not in a frenzy. With intention. She threw my grandmother's vanity over with both hands, grunting from the effort. She ground lipsticks into the floor with her heel, twisting back and forth like she was crushing cigarettes. She snapped brushes in half. She shattered mirrors. And the entire time, her face stayed calm. Almost serene. I couldn't watch anymore. I turned away, my hand over my mouth. Lisa stopped the video. I'm sorry you had to see that, she said gently. But you need to know what we're dealing with. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. She planned to destroy my entire collection, I whispered. Yes. And she used your mother's key to do it. Which means we need to determine if your mother knew. My mother wouldn't, I started, then stopped. Would she? I thought about Patricia's silence at every meal, her dismissal of my work, the way she funded Vanessa's life without question. I thought about how she'd never once asked to see my loft, never expressed interest in what I'd built. Maybe she wouldn't actively help Vanessa destroy my things. But would she look the way if Vanessa asked to borrow a key? I don't know, I admitted. I honestly don't know. Lisa pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is the preliminary assessment. Based on current market values and the documentation you provided, we're estimating replacement value at $86,000. I stared at her. What? Your insurance policy covers replacement cost, not original purchase price. Many of these items have appreciated significantly. The Guerlain compact you bought for $300? Current market value is $900. The Kigu musical compact? Now worth $3,200. We had 3 independent appraisers review your collection based on your photos and authentication documents. They all came back with similar numbers. $86,000. Double what I'd originally spent. I felt dizzy. We'll be cutting you a check within 10 business days, Lisa continued. But there's something else you should know. Given the clear evidence of deliberate destruction and the value involved, this qualifies as first-degree criminal mischief in Oregon. That's a Class C felony. The police will likely want to pursue charges whether you cooperate or not. But it will be much stronger if you're willing to testify. Against my sister, I said. Against the person who committed a crime. Family doesn't exempt anyone from the law. I sat there in that conference room, the video paused on the screen behind me, frozen on an image of Vanessa holding one of my grandmother's compacts above her head, about to smash it on the floor. I thought about every time I'd swallowed my hurt to keep the peace. Every holiday where I made myself smaller so Vanessa could feel bigger. Every phone call with my mother where I pretended her indifference didn't cut me. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn love from people who saw me as an inconvenience. "I'll testify," I said. "I'll do whatever you need." Lisa nodded and closed her folder. "The detective assigned to your case is Karen Morris. She'll be in touch soon. In the meantime, document everything. Every interaction with your family. Every phone call, every text. If anyone tries to intimidate you or convince you to drop this, we need records." I left that office feeling strange. Not quite relieved. Not quite vindicated. Just tired. Bone deep tired. I drove back to my loft and stood in the doorway, looking at the space that used to feel like sanctuary. It didn't anymore. Vanessa had taken that too. That night, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. But some part of me, the part that still wanted to believe family meant something, made me pick up. "Natalie," her voice was tight. "I heard you filed an insurance claim. For cosmetics." "For my collection," I corrected. "It was destroyed." "Vanessa said you're trying to blame her. That you're making wild accusations because you're jealous of her engagement." I laughed. Couldn't help it. The sound came out harsh and disbelieving. "Mom, there's security footage. From the building and from my personal cameras. It shows Vanessa using your key to break into my place. It shows her destroying everything." Silence on the other end. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, cold and flat, my mother said something that changed everything between us forever. "You must have edited that footage. You've always been dramatic. You've always needed attention." The line went dead. She'd hung up on me. I stood there holding my phone, staring at the blank screen, and something inside me quietly broke. Not my heart. That had broken years ago in smaller, invisible ways. This was different. This was the last thread of hope snapping. The final understanding that no matter what I did, no matter how much evidence I presented, my mother would choose Vanessa. She would always choose Vanessa. I called Detective Morris. She'd left her card with the officers who'd taken the initial report. She answered on the third ring, her voice professional but not unkind. "This is Natalie Harper," I said. "I'm ready to press charges against my sister. I want to move forward with everything." "I understand this is difficult," Detective Morris said. "Family cases always are. But I want you to know we take property crimes of this magnitude very seriously. I've reviewed the footage from your insurance investigator. It's compelling evidence. I'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement." "I'll be there." "Good. And Miss Harper? You should prepare yourself. Once we move forward with charges, there's no going back. Your family will likely close ranks. This will get harder before it gets easier." "I know," I said. "But it can't be harder than pretending this didn't happen." The next morning, I drove to the Central Precinct downtown. Detective Morris met me in the lobby, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. She led me to an interview room and spent 2 hours walking me through every detail. She asked about my relationship with Vanessa, about our childhood, about patterns of behavior. I told her everything. The jealousy. The competition. The way Vanessa had always needed to diminish what I loved in order to feel superior. Detective Morris took notes without judgment, her pen moving steadily across the page. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Based on the evidence, we'll be filing charges for first-degree criminal mischief, criminal trespass, and theft by receiving. The last one is because she used a key she wasn't authorized to possess." "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll issue an arrest warrant. She'll likely be picked up within 48 hours. She'll be booked, arraigned, and given the opportunity to post bail. After that, it moves through the court system. With evidence this strong, there's a good chance her attorney will push for a plea deal. And if she doesn't take it? Then it goes to trial. And you'll have to testify in open court about everything that happened. I nodded slowly. Okay. Detective Morris walked me out. At the station doors, she stopped and looked at me carefully. I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've seen a lot of family cases. The ones that stick with me are the ones where the victim finally decides they're worth protecting. You're doing the right thing. Her words stayed with me as I drove home. You're worth protecting. Such a simple statement. But I'd spent so long believing I wasn't, believing that keeping the peace mattered more than defending myself, that hearing someone say it out loud felt revolutionary. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. You ruined everything. Vanessa's voice was shaking with rage. The police arrested me. At work. In front of everyone. Do you have any idea what you've done? I destroyed your collection, I said calmly. I reported a crime. Those were just things, Natalie. Old makeup nobody cares about. You're tearing this family apart over things. They weren't just things to me. They were my work. My passion. My grandmother's legacy. And you knew that when you destroyed them. Mom's right about you. You've always been selfish. You've always put yourself first. I hung up. Blocked her number. Then I sat down on my couch and finally, for the first time since finding my loft destroyed, I cried. Not from sadness. From relief. Because I'd spent 30 years trying to be small enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough to earn love from people who were never going to give it. And I was done. Over the next week, the messages started coming. My father sent a carefully worded email asking me to reconsider, to think about what this was doing to the family's reputation. Tyler called, confused and hurt, saying he didn't understand why I was being so extreme. Distant cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in years, reached out with concern that felt more like judgment. Everyone had an opinion about my decision to press charges. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody acknowledged what had been taken from me. Zoe was the only one who showed up. She brought groceries, helped me clean the last of the debris, sat with me while I sorted through what could be salvaged. It wasn't much. A few compacts with cracked mirrors but intact powder. Some brushes with bent ferrules but usable bristles. Everything else was gone. Grandmother Helen's collection, reduced to trash. The insurance check arrived on a Wednesday. $86,412. I deposited it and sat in my car in the bank parking lot, staring at the balance on my phone screen. It was more money than I'd ever had at once. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like compensation for something irreplaceable. That night, I did something I hadn't done since the destruction. I opened my laptop and started researching. Estate sales. Auctions. Vintage cosmetics dealers. If I couldn't get back what I'd lost, maybe I could build something new. Something that honored where I came from while moving toward where I needed to go. I made lists. Marked items I wanted to acquire. Calculated how far the insurance money would stretch if I was strategic. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief. I felt purpose. The arraignment happened on a gray Thursday morning. I didn't attend, but Detective Morris called me afterward to explain what had happened. Vanessa had pleaded not guilty. Her attorney, someone expensive my parents had hired, argued that this was a family dispute blown out of proportion. He'd requested the charges be reduced to misdemeanor vandalism. The judge had denied the request. With the video evidence and the monetary value involved, the felony charges stood. A trial date was set for 3 months out. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I felt numb. I went through my days on autopilot, filming content I'd already planned, editing videos that felt hollow. My subscribers noticed something was off. Comments started appearing asking if I was okay, if something had happened. I didn't respond. I couldn't explain to strangers that my sister had tried to erase me and my family had chosen her side. Then the lawyer called. Not Detective Morris, but someone from the district attorney's office. Her name was Michelle Park, and she was prosecuting Vanessa's case. She wanted to meet with me to prepare for trial, to go over my testimony, to make sure I understood what the process would involve. We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse, somewhere public and neutral. Michelle was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with glasses that kept sliding down her nose and a leather portfolio stuffed with documents. She ordered a latte and got straight to business. Your case is strong. The video evidence is irrefutable. But I need you to understand what you're going to face on the stand. Defense attorneys in family cases always go for character assassination. They'll paint you as vindictive, jealous, mentally unstable. They'll suggest you staged the whole thing for insurance money. They'll bring up every argument you've ever had with your sister and twist it to make you look like the aggressor. I stirred my tea slowly. What do I need to do? Tell the truth. Stay calm. Don't let them bait you into anger. The moment you lose your composure, they'll use it against you. Michelle pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. I've been reviewing your social media. Your YouTube channel, Instagram, everything public-facing. You've built an impressive platform. That works in our favor because it establishes the legitimate value of your collection. But it also gives the defense ammunition. They'll argue you're doing this for publicity, for content. I'm not, I said quietly. I know. But they'll try to make the jury believe otherwise. So we need to be prepared for that narrative. We spent 2 hours going over potential questions, practicing responses, role-playing the hostile cross-examination I'd face. By the end, my head was pounding and my throat was dry. Michelle packed up her portfolio and looked at me with something between sympathy and respect. This isn't easy. Family trials never are. But you're doing better than most people would. Just remember, the truth is on your side. The evidence is on your side. Don't let them make you doubt that. I drove home as the sun was setting, the sky turning shades of pink and orange that felt too beautiful for how ugly everything had become. When I got back to my loft, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No postage, no return address. Just my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A letter, handwritten, the ink slightly smudged like whoever wrote it had been crying. Natalie, I'm sorry. I didn't know what Vanessa was planning. She asked to borrow the spare key because she said she wanted to drop off a birthday gift for you. I didn't question it. I should have. I know you probably don't believe me, but I need you to know I never would have given her that key if I'd known what she intended to do. Your mother. I read it 3 times. Each time, I felt something different. First confusion. Then anger. Then something sadder and more complicated. Even now, even with everything that had happened, Patricia couldn't take full responsibility. She was sorry, but only for being deceived. Not for the years of dismissing my work. Not for defending Vanessa when the truth came out. Not for calling me dramatic and accusing me of editing footage. Just sorry she'd been used. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I didn't throw it away. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because some small part of me still wanted to believe my mother was capable of real remorse. Or maybe I just needed to keep it as evidence of how little she actually understood about what she'd done. That weekend, Zoe convinced me to get out of the loft. We drove to the coast, to a small town where nobody knew us and we could walk on the beach without running into anyone from my past. The ocean was cold and gray, waves crashing with enough force to drown out thought. We walked for miles, our shoes getting soaked, sand crusting our jeans. Zoe didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless comfort. She just walked beside me, present and steady. Eventually, I told her about the letter. She listened without interrupting, then picked up a piece of driftwood and hurled it into the surf. Your mom's trying to clear her conscience without actually changing anything. That's not an apology. That's self-preservation. I know. Are you going to respond? I don't think so. What would I even say? Zoe turned to face me, her hair whipping around in the wind. You could say that sorry isn't enough. You could say that if she really cared, she'd be standing beside you instead of writing letters she slips under your door like a coward. You could say a lot of things. But honestly, she doesn't deserve your words. She's had 30 years of them and she never listened. We stayed until the sun started to set, then drove back to Portland with the windows down and music playing loud enough to feel instead of think. When Zoe dropped me off at my building, she made me promise to call if I needed anything. I promised, and I meant it. The weeks crawled by. I threw myself into work, using the insurance money to slowly rebuild my collection. I attended estate sales and auctions, searching for pieces that spoke to me the way Grandmother Helen's collection had. I couldn't replace what I'd lost, not exactly, but I could create something new. I found a Stratton compact at an estate sale in Seattle, not the same one Vanessa had destroyed, but from the same era. I found brushes at an auction in San Francisco, their handles worn smooth by decades of use. Each piece I acquired felt like an act of defiance. You tried to erase me, and I'm still here. My channel started to change too. I'd always focused on restoration tutorials and historical deep dives, but now I started talking about the emotional connection people have to objects. Why we keep things. What they represent. How physical items can hold memory and meaning in ways that transcend their monetary value. The response was overwhelming. People shared their own stories of loss, of family members who didn't understand their passions, of collections that mattered more than anyone outside could comprehend. My subscriber count grew. Brands started reaching out for collaborations. What Vanessa had tried to destroy was growing stronger in its absence. But underneath the professional success, something else was happening. I was changing. The person who'd walked into her mother's house for lunch that day, the one who'd swallowed hurt to keep peace, who'd made herself small to avoid conflict, she was gone. In her place was someone harder. Someone who understood that love without respect is just manipulation with better marketing. Someone who knew that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. 2 weeks before the trial, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Natalie, it's Tyler. My brother's voice was hesitant, careful. We hadn't spoken since the arrest. I'd assumed he'd chosen sides the way everyone else had. I'm listening, I said, my tone neutral. I need to tell you something. I should have told you weeks ago, but I was scared. He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. I was there that day. At Mom's house. I heard Vanessa asking Mom for your key. I heard Mom ask why, and Vanessa said she wanted to surprise you with something. I didn't think anything of it at the time. But after you left, Vanessa was on the phone with Brandon. She was laughing about something. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I heard her say your name. And she said something about teaching you a lesson. My hand tightened around the phone. You heard her say that and you didn't warn me? I didn't know what it meant. I swear, Nat, I didn't know she was going to do what she did. But after the arrest, after seeing the footage, I realized I should have said something. I should have questioned it. Tyler, I said slowly, are you willing to testify to what you heard? Silence. Then, quietly, if you need me to, yes. But Mom and Dad will never forgive me. They already don't forgive me. At least you'd be telling the truth. He promised to call Michelle Park, the prosecutor, and give a statement. After we hung up, I sat on my couch feeling something unfamiliar. Not quite hope. Maybe validation. Someone in my family, finally, was willing to stand on the side of truth even when it cost them something. Michelle called me the next day, excitement clear in her voice. Your brother's testimony corroborates premeditation. It shows Vanessa was planning this, that it wasn't some spontaneous act of anger. This strengthens our case significantly. Defense attorneys love to argue heat of passion, temporary insanity, anything to reduce culpability. But premeditation? That's much harder to defend against. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, going over everything Michelle had prepared me for. The questions I'd be asked. The way Vanessa's lawyer would try to twist my words. The moment I'd have to look at my sister across a courtroom and speak the truth about what she'd done. Part of me wanted to back out. To call Michelle and say I couldn't go through with it. To let Vanessa take a plea deal and avoid the public spectacle of a trial. But then I thought about the video. The methodical way Vanessa had destroyed everything I loved. The satisfaction on her face. The years of dismissiveness and cruelty that had led to that moment. And I knew I couldn't let it go. Not for her sake. For mine. The courthouse was downtown, an imposing building with marble columns and security checkpoints. I arrived early with Zoe by my side. She'd taken the day off work to be there, refusing to let me face this alone. Michelle met us in the lobby and walked us through what would happen. Opening statements. Witness testimony. Cross-examination. She warned me again that it would be difficult, that I'd hear things about myself that weren't true, that I'd need to stay composed no matter what. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of benches that looked like church pews. Vanessa sat at the defense table with her attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never lost a case in his life. She didn't look at me when I entered. Just stared straight ahead, her face blank. My parents sat in the gallery behind her. Patricia wore black, her face pale and drawn. Richard sat beside her, his expression unreadable. Tyler sat on the opposite side, behind the prosecution. When our eyes met, he gave me a small nod. It wasn't much. But it was something. The judge entered, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Everyone stood. The trial began. Michelle's opening statement was clear and direct. She outlined the evidence. The security footage showing Vanessa entering my loft with unauthorized access. The interior camera footage showing the deliberate destruction. The financial impact, over $40,000 in documented losses. The emotional impact, the destruction of irreplaceable items with historical and sentimental value. She painted a picture of calculated malice, of a crime motivated by jealousy and a desire to inflict maximum pain. Vanessa's attorney, a man named Robert Gaines, countered with a different narrative. This was a family dispute, he argued. A misunderstanding between sisters. Yes, property was damaged. But was it criminal? Or was it the unfortunate result of long-standing family tensions that should have been resolved privately? He suggested I'd exaggerated the value of my collection for insurance purposes. He hinted that my decision to press charges was motivated by a desire for attention and publicity for my social media career. He made Vanessa sound like a victim of my ambition. I sat in the gallery listening to him rewrite reality and felt my jaw clench. Zoe reached over and squeezed my hand. "Stay calm," she whispered. "The truth will come out." The prosecution called their first witness. The building security guard, Derek Walsh, who'd pulled the hallway footage. He testified about the timestamp, about confirming the woman in the video was Vanessa, about the fact that there was no sign of forced entry. Under cross-examination, Gaines tried to suggest the video quality was too poor to make a definitive identification. Derek held firm. It was her. Next came Lisa Chen, the insurance investigator. She walked the jury through my documentation, explaining how she'd verified the authenticity and value of each item. She showed photographs of my collection before the destruction, pointing out specific pieces and their market values. She explained how insurance fraud investigations work, making it clear that every claim I'd made had been thoroughly vetted. Under cross-examination, Gaines asked if it was possible I'd inflated values. Lisa looked at him with barely concealed disdain. Everything was authenticated by independent appraisers. The values are conservative, if anything. Then it was my turn. Michelle called me to the stand. I walked up, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. My voice only shook a little. Michelle started with easy questions. My name. My profession. How I'd built my collection. I answered clearly, keeping my responses factual. Then she asked me to describe what I found when I returned to my loft that day. I took a breath and told the truth. The overturned furniture. The shattered glass. The crushed compacts and broken mirrors. The way my grandmother's vanity lay on its side, its legacy reduced to wreckage. How did you feel when you saw that? Michelle asked. Like someone had reached inside me and torn out everything that mattered. Gaines objected. Relevance. The judge overruled him. The witness may describe her emotional state. Michelle showed me photographs of the destruction. Can you identify these items? I went through them one by one. A Guerlain compact my grandmother used on the set of a film noir in 1948. A set of brushes she'd carried in her kit for 30 years. Lipsticks in shades that didn't exist anymore, formulas that couldn't be replicated. Each identification felt like attending a funeral. Then Michelle played the video. The courtroom went silent. Everyone watched as Vanessa systematically destroyed my life's work. Some jurors looked uncomfortable. One woman covered her mouth. When it ended, Michelle asked one final question. In your professional opinion, could these items be replaced? I looked directly at the jury. Some of them, maybe. With enough time and money. But my grandmother's collection? The pieces she used in her career? The things she touched and loved and passed down to me? Those are gone forever. You can't replace history. You can only grieve it. Michelle thanked me and sat down. Then Robert Gaines stood up, and I braced myself for what came next. Gaines approached the witness stand with the kind of calculated confidence that made my skin crawl. He smiled, not warmly, but like a predator that had spotted something wounded. He held a folder in one hand and tapped it against his palm as he studied me. Miss Harper, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. You've built quite the social media following, haven't you? Over 500,000 subscribers on YouTube alone? Yes, I said carefully. And you monetize that content? You make money from views, sponsorships, brand deals? I do. It's my profession. He nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something damning. So when this incident occurred, when your collection was damaged, you saw an opportunity, didn't you? An opportunity to create compelling content. A tragedy that would drive engagement. No, I said firmly. I saw my life's work destroyed. But you did film content about it, didn't you? After the destruction, you created videos discussing what happened? I documented the loss, yes. That's what I do. I educate people about vintage cosmetics and their historical value. Gaines smiled wider. Or perhaps you saw a chance to gain sympathy, to boost your channel's visibility, to position yourself as a victim for profit? Objection, Michelle said sharply, rising from her seat. Argumentative and assumes facts not in evidence. Sustained, the judge said. Mr. Gaines, ask questions, don't make speeches. Gaines didn't look bothered. He flipped open his folder and pulled out a printed screenshot. This is from your Instagram, posted 2 days after the incident. You wrote, and I quote, "Sometimes the worst moments teach us who we really are." You included a photo of yourself looking contemplative. That seems rather calculated for someone supposedly devastated, doesn't it? I was processing trauma, I said evenly. People cope in different ways. Or you were already thinking about how to spin this for your audience. I wasn't spinning anything. I was trying to make sense of what my sister had done to me. Gaines pounced on that. Your sister. Let's talk about your relationship with Vanessa. You've never gotten along, have you? We've had our difficulties. He pulled out more papers. I have statements from family members describing you as jealous of your sister. Resentful of her success, her engagement, the attention she received from your parents. Would you say that's accurate? I felt heat rising in my chest but kept my voice level. I wasn't jealous. I was tired of being dismissed. Dismissed? He raised an eyebrow. Or perhaps you felt entitled to more than you deserved. You chose a career path your parents didn't approve of, something they saw as frivolous. A hobby rather than a profession. And when they didn't support that choice financially, you held a grudge. They had every right to their opinion, I said. But that doesn't give anyone the right to destroy my property. Property you claim was worth over $40,000. He said it like the number itself was suspicious. That's quite a lot of money for old makeup, isn't it? For authenticated vintage cosmetics with historical provenance, it's actually reasonable. Or it's inflated. Convenient that after the destruction, the insurance company valued your collection at double what you originally paid. Almost like you knew how to work the system. Michelle objected again. Mischaracterizes the witness's testimony and the insurance investigation process. Sustained. But Gaines wasn't done. He asked about specific items, questioning their values, suggesting I'd exaggerated their importance. He brought up arguments I'd had with Vanessa years ago, petty sisterly disputes that had nothing to do with what happened in my loft. He painted a picture of me as bitter, opportunistic, someone who'd been waiting for a chance to hurt Vanessa the way I felt she'd hurt me. Through it all, I kept my composure. I answered his questions directly. I didn't take the bait when he tried to provoke me. I remembered Michelle's coaching. Stay calm. Tell the truth. Don't let him make you angry. Finally, after what felt like hours, Gaines stepped back. No further questions. I left the stand feeling wrung out, my hands shaking slightly as I returned to my seat. Zoe leaned close and whispered that I'd done well, that I hadn't let him rattle me. But I felt rattled. I felt like I'd just been put on trial instead of Vanessa. The prosecution called Tyler next. My brother walked to the stand looking pale, his eyes darting once to where our parents sat. Patricia's expression was stone. Richard looked down at his hands. Tyler confirmed what he'd told me on the phone. He'd been at the house that day. He'd heard Vanessa ask for my key. He'd heard the phone conversation afterward, the comment about teaching me a lesson. His voice was quiet but clear. Under cross-examination, Gaines tried to suggest Tyler was lying to help me, that we'd cooked up this story together. Tyler held firm. He had no reason to lie. He was just telling the truth about what he'd witnessed. When Tyler stepped down, he didn't return to his seat. He walked out of the courtroom entirely. I didn't blame him. Choosing truth over loyalty in families like ours came with a cost he'd now have to pay. The prosecution rested. It was the defense's turn. Gaines called Vanessa to the stand. She wore a navy dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back simply. She looked nothing like the woman in the video, the one who'd methodically destroyed everything I loved. She looked small and sad and sorry. Under Gaines' questioning, Vanessa told her version of events. Yes, she'd gone to my loft that day. Yes, she'd used the key our mother had given her. But she hadn't gone there to destroy anything. She'd gone to talk to me, to apologize for comments she'd made at lunch. When she arrived and I wasn't there, she'd let herself in to wait. While waiting, she'd started looking at my collection. She claimed she'd picked up a compact to examine it and accidentally dropped it. It shattered. In her panic and clumsiness, she'd knocked over other items trying to clean up the mess. The destruction, she insisted, was entirely accidental. It was the most absurd lie I'd ever heard. But Vanessa sold it with tears in her eyes and a trembling voice. She said she'd been too ashamed to tell me what happened, that she'd left quickly hoping to fix it before I found out. She claimed she had no idea the damage was so extensive until after I'd filed the police report. I sat there listening to her rewrite reality and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. This wasn't just about the makeup anymore. This was about the fundamental impossibility of having a relationship with someone who could look you in the eye, with video evidence of their cruelty, and still lie. Michelle's cross-examination was brutal. She played the video again, pausing at key moments. Here, Vanessa deliberately lifting the vanity with both hands and throwing it. Here, Vanessa grinding lipsticks into the floor with her heel. Here, Vanessa snapping brushes in half. Does this look accidental? Vanessa insisted the video didn't show the full context, that it looked worse than it was. Michelle asked why, if it was an accident. Vanessa had never called to explain, never apologized, never offered to replace anything. Vanessa said she'd been scared, overwhelmed, unsure how to handle it. Michelle pulled out phone records. You called your fiancé Brandon immediately after leaving the loft. That call lasted 7 minutes. What did you discuss? I was upset. I told him what happened. Did you tell him it was an accident? Vanessa hesitated. I don't remember exactly what I said. Michelle produced a transcript. Your fiancé's phone was subpoenaed. He'd recorded the call. Would you like me to play it for the jury? Vanessa's face went white. Gaines objected on technical grounds, but the judge allowed it. Michelle played the audio. Vanessa's voice came through the courtroom speakers, breathless and excited. I did it. I actually did it. You should have seen it, Brandon. Everything she cares about, just gone. Maybe now she'll understand what it feels like. There was laughter on the recording. Brandon's voice, amused and encouraging. That's my girl. Did you get photos? Vanessa, on the recording, said she'd been too focused on the task but that the security cameras would have captured everything. She said she didn't care. She wanted me to know it was her. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel calling for order. Vanessa broke down sobbing, her carefully constructed victim narrative collapsing. Gaines looked like he'd been blindsided. My parents sat frozen, Patricia's hand over her mouth. Michelle stood there letting the audio speak for itself. Then she asked one more question. Miss Harper, does that sound like an accident to you? Vanessa couldn't answer through her tears. Michelle sat down. The damage was done. The defense called Brandon next, trying to recover. He claimed the recording was taken out of context, that Vanessa had been speaking hyperbolically out of stress. But the audio was clear. There was no ambiguity. He'd encouraged her. He'd celebrated with her. Under Michelle's cross-examination, he admitted he'd thought my collection was a waste of money, that he'd agreed with Vanessa that I needed to grow up and focus on real achievements. The prosecution called one final witness. A forensic psychologist who'd reviewed the video footage and Vanessa's behavior patterns. She testified about premeditation, about the psychology of destructive acts, about how the methodical nature of what Vanessa had done indicated planning rather than impulse. She explained that accidents don't follow patterns. What the video showed was systematic, targeted, intentional. Closing arguments happened the next day. Michelle reminded the jury of the evidence. The video footage. The audio recording. The witness testimony. The documented value of what was destroyed. She asked them to consider not just the monetary loss but the emotional and historical loss. This wasn't about makeup, she said. This was about one person deliberately trying to erase another person's identity, their passion, their connection to someone they loved who'd passed away. Gaines tried to salvage what he could. He talked about family pressures, about how siblings sometimes act out in ways they regret. He suggested this was a civil matter, not a criminal one, something that should be resolved through therapy and restitution rather than jail time. But his argument felt hollow after the audio recording. There was no walking back Vanessa's own words. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I spent that time in a small room with Michelle and Zoe, unable to eat, unable to focus on anything. Every possible outcome ran through my mind. What if they believed Gaines? What if they thought I was exaggerating? What if they decided this was just a family squabble not worth criminal charges? Finally, the bailiff came to get us. The jury had reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. Vanessa looked diminished, her confidence from the beginning of the trial completely gone. My parents sat rigid in their seats. Tyler had returned and sat in the back row, his face unreadable. The jury foreman stood. On the count of first-degree criminal mischief, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of criminal trespass, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of theft by receiving, how do you find? Guilty on all counts. The courtroom exploded in whispers. Vanessa collapsed forward, her head in her hands. Gaines put a hand on her shoulder but didn't look surprised. The judge banged her gavel and set a sentencing hearing for 3 weeks out. I sat there feeling nothing at first. Then something enormous and overwhelming. Not happiness. Not satisfaction. Just relief. The truth had been heard. The truth had been believed. After a lifetime of being dismissed and diminished, someone had finally said yes, what happened to you matters. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. They'd caught wind of the trial, the unusual nature of the case, the social media angle. I made a brief statement, thanking the jury and the prosecution. I didn't gloat. I didn't attack my family. I just said I hoped this would remind people that emotional and historical value matters as much as monetary value, that what we love deserves protection, even from those closest to us. Zoe drove me home. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. When we reached my building, she walked me up to my loft and made sure I ate something before she left. After she was gone, I stood at my window looking out at the city lights, at the life continuing below, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not complete. Not perfect. But present. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer but something made me pick up. Natalie. It was my father's voice, rough and uncertain. We need to talk. I don't think we do, I said quietly. Your mother is devastated. Vanessa is facing jail time. This family is falling apart. This family fell apart a long time ago, Dad. You just didn't notice because I was the only one paying the price for keeping it together. He tried to say more but I ended the call. I didn't block the number. I just set my phone down and walked away from it. Some conversations weren't worth having. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged no matter how much history they carried. That night, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not for my channel. Not for public consumption. Just for me. I wrote about everything I'd learned through this process. That love without respect is worthless. That family is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your value. That rebuilding after destruction is possible, but only if you're willing to let go of what can't be saved. I wrote until my hands cramped and my eyes burned. When I finally stopped, the sky outside was starting to lighten with dawn. I saved the document, closed my laptop, and went to bed. For the first time since finding my loft destroyed, I slept through the night without nightmares. The sentencing hearing fell on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks later. I debated whether to attend. Michelle said it wasn't required, that I'd already done my part by testifying. But something pulled me back to that courthouse one final time. Not for revenge. Not to watch Vanessa suffer. I needed to see the end of this chapter so I could finally close it and move forward. The courtroom felt different this time. Smaller somehow. Less charged. The jury box sat empty. Only the judge, the attorneys, and a handful of observers remained. Vanessa sat at the defense table wearing gray, her posture defeated. My parents sat behind her again, but Tyler's seat was empty. He'd made his choice and was living with the consequences. The judge reviewed the case details, the guilty verdicts on all counts, the sentencing guidelines for the crimes committed. Gaines made a plea for leniency. He talked about Vanessa's lack of prior criminal record, her remorse, the family circumstances that had contributed to her actions. He suggested community service and restitution rather than incarceration. Vanessa herself read a prepared statement, her voice barely audible, saying she was sorry for what she'd done, that she understood now how wrong it was, that she wanted to make amends. It felt rehearsed. Empty. The same way her testimony had felt. I'd heard Vanessa apologize before, usually when it benefited her, when she needed something or wanted to avoid consequences. This was no different. Michelle stood and addressed the judge. She didn't argue for maximum punishment. Instead, she focused on accountability. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, she said. This was calculated destruction of property with both monetary and irreplaceable sentimental value. The defendant not only committed the crime but celebrated it afterward, showed no genuine remorse until facing legal consequences, and attempted to lie about her actions under oath. The justice system exists to hold people accountable for their choices. Today, we're asking the court to do exactly that. The judge took a long moment, reviewing documents in front of her. Then she looked up, her gaze moving from Vanessa to the gallery before settling back on the defense table. "Miss Harper," she began, and for a second I thought she was addressing me before realizing she meant Vanessa. The evidence in this case was overwhelming. Video footage showed you deliberately destroying property belonging to your sister. Audio recordings captured you celebrating that destruction. Your testimony attempted to deny what was plainly visible. This court takes perjury seriously. We also take seriously crimes motivated by spite and jealousy, particularly when they target not just material goods but familial bonds and personal history. The judge paused, letting her words settle. "On the charge of first-degree criminal mischief, I sentence you to 18 months incarceration with credit for time served, followed by 2 years supervised probation. On the charge of criminal trespass, 6 months concurrent. On the charge of theft by receiving, 6 months concurrent. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution in the amount of $86,412 to cover the insurance payout and associated costs. You will have no contact with the victim during your probation period. Do you understand these terms?" Vanessa nodded, tears streaming down her face. My mother made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. My father sat stone still. The judge wasn't finished. "I want to add something that's not part of the formal record," she said. "Family relationships are complicated. Courts generally try to stay out of family disputes. But this case crossed a line from dispute into crime. What you destroyed wasn't just property. It was history. Memory. Connection to a deceased loved one. Those things have value that can't be measured in dollars. I hope during your time in custody, you'll reflect not just on what you did, but on why you did it, and on the kind of person you want to be when you're released." Court was adjourned. Vanessa was taken into custody immediately. As the bailiff led her away, she looked back once at our parents. Patricia was crying openly now, clutching Richard's arm. Neither of them looked at me. They walked out a side exit without acknowledgement, without even a glance in my direction. I stood there in the emptying courtroom feeling strange. Lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long I'd forgotten it was there, and now it was gone. Michelle approached and shook my hand, congratulating me on seeing this through. She said most people don't have the strength to hold family accountable. I thanked her for everything she'd done, for believing me, for fighting for me. Outside, the morning was bright and clear. Portland in spring, the air fresh with rain that had fallen overnight. I walked to my car slowly, not rushing, just breathing. My phone buzzed with messages. Zoe checking in. A few friends who'd followed the case. And one from Tyler. "I'm sorry I wasn't there today. I couldn't face them again. But I'm proud of you. You did what needed to be done." I texted back a simple thank you and meant it. Tyler had made a choice that cost him his relationship with our parents. That wasn't nothing. It was something I understood deeply now, the price of choosing truth over comfort. I drove back to my loft and sat in my car for a few minutes before going up. This space had been violated, turned into a crime scene, stripped of its sanctuary. But it was still mine. And I got to decide what it became next. Over the following weeks, I focused on rebuilding. Not just my collection, but my life. I used part of the insurance money to acquire new pieces, attending estate sales and auctions with fresh eyes. I found a 1930s Elgin compact with an enameled lid that took my breath away. I discovered a set of brushes at an auction in Vancouver that had belonged to a theater makeup artist from the 60s. Each piece I added felt intentional, chosen not because it replaced what I'd lost but because it represented moving forward. I also changed how I talked about my work online. I started being more open with my audience about what had happened, not in a sensational way, but honestly. I talked about the emotional value of collections, about how objects can carry memory and meaning, about what it means to rebuild after loss. The response was overwhelming. People shared their own stories. They sent messages of support. They told me about their collections, their passions, the things they loved that others dismissed. My channel grew. Brands reached out. Opportunities appeared that wouldn't have existed before. But more than the professional success, something else shifted. I stopped seeking validation from people who would never give it. I stopped making myself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for me. I learned to recognize the difference between people who loved me and people who loved the idea of controlling me. A month after sentencing, I received a letter forwarded from the prison. Vanessa's handwriting on the envelope. I held it for a long time before opening it, debating whether I wanted to read what was inside. Finally, curiosity won. The letter was short. She wrote that she'd had time to think about what she'd done and why. She admitted she'd been jealous of me for years, jealous of my passion, my focus, the way I'd built something meaningful without relying on our parents' money. She said she'd wanted to hurt me because watching me succeed reminded her of her own failures. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said she was sorry and that she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again. I read it twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I would. Maybe not. But I didn't owe her immediate forgiveness just because she'd finally had time to think about consequences while sitting in a cell. 2 months after sentencing, I got a call from a number I almost didn't recognize. Aunt Claire, my mother's sister who I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd heard about the trial through family gossip and wanted to reach out. We met for coffee at a small place in the Pearl District, neutral territory. Claire was in her late 50s, elegant in a way my mother had always aspired to but never achieved. She ordered tea and got straight to the point. "Your mother called me last week," she said. "She's devastated. Feeling like she's lost both daughters. She wanted me to reach out, to see if there was any chance of reconciliation." I stirred my coffee slowly. "What do you think?" Claire leaned back, studying me with sharp, assessing eyes. "I think your mother made choices that led to this outcome. I think she enabled Vanessa's worst behaviors for years because it was easier than setting boundaries. I think she dismissed your value because you didn't follow the script she'd written for your life. And I think she's only devastated now because there are consequences she can't ignore." I felt something in my chest loosen. Someone in my family finally understood. Claire continued. "I also think you're well within your rights to never speak to any of them again. But I want you to know something. When your grandmother Helen was dying, she pulled me aside. She was worried about you. She said you had the biggest heart of anyone in the family and she was scared it would get broken by people who didn't deserve it. She made me promise to check on you if I ever heard you needed someone." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I miss her so much." "She'd be proud of you," Claire said firmly. "Not because you pressed charges. Not because you won. Because you stood up for yourself. Because you refused to let them erase what mattered to you. That takes courage most people never develop." We talked for 2 hours. Claire told me stories about grandmother Helen I'd never heard, about her career in Hollywood, about the resistance she'd faced as a woman in a male-dominated industry, about how she'd persevered because she loved the work more than she feared the obstacles. It felt like getting a piece of my grandmother back, these stories I'd never known. Before we parted, Claire handed me something wrapped in tissue paper. I opened it carefully. Inside was a small silver compact, Art Deco style, with initials engraved on the lid. HMR. Helen Marie Rousseau. This was hers, Claire said. "I found it in my mother's things after she passed. I always meant to give it to you, but I lost touch with the family. Consider it returned to its rightful owner. I held it carefully, feeling the weight of it, the history. Thank you, I whispered. Claire squeezed my hand. You're not alone in this, Natalie. I know it feels that way. But you have people who see you. Don't forget that. After she left, I sat in the coffee shop holding that compact, feeling connected to my grandmother in a way I hadn't since her death. It wasn't about the object itself. It was about being seen and valued by someone who understood what these things meant, who didn't dismiss or diminish what I loved. That evening, I filmed a video for my channel. I showed the compact Claire had given me, talked about its history, about my grandmother's career. I talked about loss and rebuilding. I talked about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your passions rather than belittle them. I didn't mention the trial specifically, but the context was there for anyone who'd been following along. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of comments from people sharing their own stories of unsupportive families, of passions dismissed, of having to choose between being true to themselves and maintaining toxic relationships. I spent hours that night reading through them, responding where I could, feeling part of something larger than my own experience. 3 months after sentencing, I made a decision. I rented a small studio space in the Arts District, separate from my loft. A place dedicated entirely to my work, where I could film content, meet with clients who wanted restoration services, and teach workshops about vintage cosmetics care. I couldn't afford something large, but it was mine. A space I'd created from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The first workshop I taught had 8 students. We spent 3 hours learning about compact restoration, about identifying authentic vintage pieces, about the history of different cosmetics companies. The students were engaged and curious, asking questions, sharing their own collections. At the end, a woman in her 60s approached me. My daughter thinks I'm crazy for keeping my mother's old makeup, she said. She wants me to throw it all away. But after today, I understand why I can't. It's not about the makeup. It's about connection. Exactly, I said. It's about keeping history alive. She hugged me, thanked me for validating something she'd questioned for years. After everyone left, I sat alone in my new studio space feeling something I'd been chasing my whole life. Purpose. Not the kind that came from proving myself to people who would never appreciate me. The kind that came from doing work that mattered, from connecting with people who understood, from building something authentic rather than performative. 6 months after sentencing, the restitution payments started arriving. Small amounts deposited monthly into an account set up through the court system. Vanessa was required to pay back what the insurance company had covered. It would take years at this rate, probably the full length of her probation. Each payment was a reminder that actions have consequences, that you can't destroy someone's life and walk away unchanged. I didn't spend the money. I set up a scholarship fund in grandmother Helen's name for young people interested in beauty history and vintage cosmetics preservation. The first scholarship would be awarded next year. It felt right, turning something destructive into something generative, honoring my grandmother's legacy by supporting others who shared her passion. Tyler and I started meeting for coffee once a month. He'd been cut off by our parents completely, no longer invited to family gatherings, no longer part of the inner circle. It had been hard on him, but he said he didn't regret his choice. Living with the truth, he said, was easier than living with a comfortable lie. We didn't talk about Vanessa much. She was serving her sentence and that was that. We talked about our lives, our work, the futures we were building. Tyler had started therapy, working through years of family dysfunction. He said it was helping him understand patterns he'd never questioned before. "You're braver than me," he said one afternoon. "You've always been willing to stand alone." "I'm not brave," I told him. I was just finally more afraid of losing myself than of losing them. A year after the trial, I received notification that Vanessa was eligible for early release due to good behavior. She'd serve out the remainder of her sentence on house arrest with electronic monitoring. Part of me felt something about this news. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just acknowledgement. She'd served her time. The justice system had done what it was designed to do. I didn't reach out. I didn't send a message or attempt contact. The no contact order was still in effect during her probation period anyway. But more than that, I simply had no desire to reconnect. Some doors, once closed, don't need to be reopened. Some relationships aren't meant to be salvaged. My mother tried one more time, a letter that arrived on the anniversary of the trial. It was longer than the first one, more detailed in its apology. She acknowledged she'd failed me, that she'd prioritized Vanessa's comfort over my dignity, that she understood if I couldn't forgive her. She said she was in therapy now too, working on understanding her own patterns, her own failures as a parent. I read it several times. Part of me wanted to believe her. Wanted to think people could change, that maybe this devastation had forced her to see what she'd been blind to before. But I'd learned something crucial over the past year. Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone. And reconciliation isn't mandatory just because someone finally sees the damage they caused. I wrote back. Not a long letter. Just a few lines. I acknowledged her apology. I said I was glad she was getting help. But I also said I wasn't ready for a relationship with her, that maybe someday I would be, but that day wasn't today. I told her I needed space to continue healing, and that I hoped she could respect that. I mailed it and felt no guilt. No obligation to do more. I'd spent my whole life managing other people's emotions, making myself smaller so they could feel bigger. I was done with that version of myself. The second anniversary of the destruction fell on a quiet Sunday in spring. I woke up in my loft, sunlight streaming through the windows, and felt at peace. I made coffee, sat at my restored workspace, now filled with new pieces I'd carefully curated, and opened my laptop. I wrote a post for my social media, reflecting on the journey. I didn't focus on the destruction or the trial. I focused on what I'd learned about resilience, about the difference between material and meaningful loss, about how sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what actually matters. The post went viral. News outlets picked it up. I did a few interviews, always careful to focus on the broader message rather than the specific family drama. I talked about the importance of protecting your passions, of surrounding yourself with people who lift you up, of knowing when to walk away from toxicity even when it wears the face of family. My channel grew past 1 million subscribers. Brands wanted partnerships. I was invited to speak at conferences about vintage preservation and the business of passion-driven content creation. Opportunities one couldn't have imagined 2 years ago when I'd walked into my destroyed loft and felt my world collapse. But the professional success wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the studio full of students learning to preserve history. The messages from people who said my story gave them courage to pursue their own passions despite family disapproval. The scholarship recipients who sent thank you notes saying they finally felt seen and supported. The community I'd built of people who understood that what you love deserves protection and celebration. One evening, I returned to my loft after teaching a workshop and found a small package outside my door. No return address. Inside was a note and a small object wrapped in cloth. The note was in Tyler's handwriting. I was cleaning out some boxes at my new place and found this. Dad had kept it hidden for years. I thought you should have it. I unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a photograph, old and slightly faded. Grandmother Helen on a movie set, brushes in hand, working on an actress whose face I recognized from classic films. But it wasn't the actress that made my breath catch. It was the background. A young girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting on an equipment case watching Helen work with absolute fascination. The girl was me. I didn't remember that day. I'd been so young. But seeing it now, seeing the way I'd looked at my grandmother, the pure adoration and interest on my small face, I understood something I'd forgotten. This passion hadn't been recent. It hadn't been a phase or a hobby that spiraled out of control. It had been part of me from the beginning. Grandmother Helen had recognized it and nurtured it. She'd seen me when I was too young to even see myself. I framed that photograph and hung it in my studio, right above my workspace where I could see it every day. A reminder that some connections transcend time and loss. That the people who truly love us leave marks that can't be erased, no matter what gets destroyed. 3 years after the trial, I was featured in a major publication about women building businesses around historical preservation. The article talked about my work, my channel, the scholarship fund, and yes, briefly, the trial that had brought everything to a head. But the focus was on what I'd built, not what I'd lost. The day the article published, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, "Congratulations." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. "Natalie, I saw the article. You've built something remarkable. I'm genuinely happy for you. I know I don't have the right to say this, and I'm not asking for anything. But I want you to know I'm proud of you. You deserved better than what our family gave you. I'm sorry I couldn't see that until it was too late. Vanessa." I read it once. Then closed it. I didn't respond. Maybe that made me cold. Maybe it made me unforgiving. But I'd learned that closure doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like moving forward without looking back. Sometimes it looks like building a life so full of meaning and purpose that the people who tried to diminish you become footnotes rather than chapters. I still think about that day sometimes. Walking into my loft and seeing everything destroyed. The shock and devastation. The way my hands shook and my breath caught. But I think about it differently now. Not as the worst day of my life, but as the day I finally stopped waiting for my family to see my worth. The day I started seeing it myself. The collection I have now is different from what I lost. It's not better or worse. Just different. Each piece tells a story, not just of its original owner, but of my journey to acquire it. The compact I found at an estate sale in Seattle the month after the trial. The brushes I bid on during a particularly hard week when I needed to remind myself why I was fighting. The vintage palettes I purchased with the first profit from my studio workshops. They're not replacements. They're new chapters. And maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. You can't replace what's been destroyed. You can only decide what you're going to build next. You can only choose whether destruction will define you or refine you. I chose refinement. I chose to let the fire burn away everything that wasn't essential and rebuild from what remained. My passion. My integrity. My unwillingness to shrink myself for anyone's comfort. On quiet evenings, I sometimes sit in my studio surrounded by vintage compacts and historic brushes and think about grandmother Helen. I imagine her watching from wherever she is, seeing what I've built, knowing that her legacy lives on not in the specific objects that were destroyed but in the passion she ignited in me. I think she'd be proud. Not because I pressed charges or won a trial or built a successful business. But because I refused to let anyone convince me that what I loved didn't matter. Because I stood up, even when it meant standing alone. Because I chose truth over comfort, authenticity over approval, myself over the version of me they wanted me to be. That's the inheritance she really left me. Not compacts and brushes, though those mattered. But the understanding that your passion is worth protecting, that history matters, that what you love deserves to be honored and celebrated and defended. And in the end, that's exactly what I did. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.